Hi, I'm Dr. Craig Chalquist. So here we are in the 9th video focusing on terrapsychological inquiry as a research methodology. And this video is about bits and pieces. So I'm just going to take a number of questions that I've been asked over the years about terrapsychological inquiry and also terrapsychology, which is an extension of psychology such that we actually tend the presence of the things of the world as they appear inside us, in our moods, in our dreams, in our emotions, our body states. And by things of the world, I mean pretty much everything. Not just nature, although that's hugely important and neglected, as ecopsychology makes very clear. So there's rivers and streams and forests and skies and all that, and how that shows up inside us, but also the built environment too. Objects and roadways, things like that, neighborhoods. Terrapsychological inquiry is the qualitative methodology that was created in order to study that. And it's been used for about, since 2006 to do exactly that. So over the years, I've gotten a number of questions that I thought I would just pile together into one video and answer. And the first one actually has to do with these videos, which is, why are the comments disabled? And the very short answer is YouTube is largely unregulated, and I don't have time to go through every single day and make sure abusive people aren't making stupid comments or worse, hurtful comments to each other on my videos. I won't have that. So it's just easier to turn the comments off, and so I have. Incidentally, I like to cook. It's one of my hobbies, although I'm not very good at it. I've survived my own creations though, so that's a good thing. And so sometimes I go around different YouTube videos looking for cooking recipes and techniques. And so there's a guy named Shotgun Red who cooks, and he actually created an entire, I think it's about a 6, 7, 8 minute video on why his comments are turned off. So if you search for him on YouTube, I mean, that's basically the same reasons mine are off. So sorry about that. Now, more specifically to terrapsychology and terrapsychological inquiry, here's a very common question. Energies, frequencies, vortices, and vibes. Do we study those? Like there are certain places on the earth that are considered magnets for energies, whatever that means. Are there vibes connecting us to different places? This is the vocabulary of the New Age, basically. And so there's a couple of problems that are built into using that vocabulary, and which is why we tend to go around it. One is a stylistic problem. So this kind of energy talk, as the philosopher Christian de Quincy calls it, it's really rooted in rather mechanical and technical metaphors that don't always really speak to the felt embodied quality of how we actually relate to place, to natural cycles, to whatever it is that we're engaging with. So there's a stylistic issue. Another issue is that we aren't just interested in surface cause-effect kinds of relationships between us and, let's say, a place that people say is a vortex. We want to go deeper. We actually want to come from a place of whatever the qualities of that particular site, how are they showing up for us, and how does our inner life tell us something important about that site? So we look for depth rather than surface literal relations. We look for the metaphors and symbols and body states and emotions and imaginings that connect us to whatever it is that we're looking at, including places. So, and a third issue for us in that kind of talk of energies and frequencies is that they presuppose a dualism that we don't find helpful. So the idea that we're affected by a particular place because it has certain energies or frequencies or what have you implies that there's a force that emanates from a place or an animal or whatever it is that we're interacting with that somehow affects us. And from the terrapsychological standpoint, the things of the world are already in us, particularly those that we're in immediate contact with. So we, for the same reason that we reject that one aspect of natural science that says things are separate until proven connected, we also don't like the idea that we need to postulate some force that connects us to things. We think we're all connected all the time anyway. So that's why we tend not to study energies and vibes and all that stuff. The next question, in some ways, is related to the one I just responded to. And so I often get asked, in the case of places or houses, or even entire neighborhoods that have some kind of a difficult past, maybe they're ecologically traumatized or historically traumatized, maybe mass murders occurred there, or there were graveyards or what have you. Do we think, those of us who do terrapsychological work, that we can heal these places with rituals or chanting or good thoughts? That's really a metaphysical question that we don't tend to deal with. That's not really our area. We pay more attention to the actual felt and experienced effect of whatever it is that we're studying, a house or a site or what have you. We also look at the dreams that come up in us in response to these places, because dreams are an excellent source of information about them. But we don't really deal with the metaphysics too much. And I do have some doubt that an entire region that has been stripped of a forest can be somehow repaired by chanting. I doubt that. I think that, and this is one of the things that you'll see in our work when you read it, there's a place at which the work gets into us and we start responding to it intellectually, emotionally, imaginatively, and then we do our homework. We may probably usually talk to people about what's happening out there if it's a place. There's other kinds of terrapsychological work that we do. But whatever the topic is, eventually we come to the question of, now what? In what way, this is the general way of stating the question that comes up for us. In what way is Earth calling out to me? In what way is this landscape or that group of people who've been pushed to one side or what have you, how is this from the heart outward inspiring me to advocate for them somehow? So we, in doing terrapsychological work, we bridge what is usually split into either deep reflection or action and use them as stages. So we begin with reflection and homework and study and all that. And then our expectation is that that evolves into some kind of action. Now, another question that comes up. So why do we emphasize stories and storytelling more than data and facts? And to some extent, I've answered that in previous videos. And it's not that we distrust facts or data. We certainly don't. There's a lot of facts and data in our studies. But in terms of story, that seems to be something that's basic to the human mind. It seems to be something that we come in with. Even before kids can speak, there are stories in their play. We tell ourselves stories every night when we dream, whether or not we ever remember our dreams. Storytelling seems basic to human experience, and when you tell stories by way of sharing something that matters to you, it begins to build trust. People who may be put off by simply defending an argument or debating something in many ways are more open if you begin with a story, if you begin with, this is why these things matter to me. And then you're relating to each other as fellow humans, as people, rather than as adversaries. So storytelling, when it's done well, tends to elicit an emotional connection. It involves more, according to the neuroscience research, it involves more of the brain than just intellectual debates and arguments. And it's really great for building relationships, especially with people that you may disagree with politically, religiously, or what have you. But when you're in the garden working together and swapping stories, it's a different experience. You're just two people together. Two members of a curious species just trying to make its way in the world. And in many cases, building relationships with or without story actually gets you farther than blaming people, shaming people, pointing fingers, arguing, yelling at people, moralizing, judging, all of which tends to push people away. The whole psychology of trying to change other people's behavior instead of minding your own is problematic for a number of reasons, and it's not very effective. So what we tend to emphasize is showing what we love and want to protect and letting that speak for itself. So another question, who should not do terrapsychological work or terrapsychological inquiry? So people who are too deeply wounded by something and haven't really come to terms with it, people suffering from addictions, people just basically fragmented or in an unstable state shouldn't do this kind of work unless I'll talk about earth dreaming in a moment, where simple reconnective exercises are involved that are fairly safe. But when you're doing a full-on terrapsychological inquiry, it opens your mind and body up oftentimes to levels of trauma that are very difficult to process, because in some cases they exist in the land itself and they're older than you. So you have to have a sturdy conscious ego, a sturdy sense of I, and plenty of support and a lot of motivation to do, if you're going to do work with, for instance, ecologically harmed aspects of the natural world. That's not all that terrapsychological inquiry deals with, but it's difficult to predict in advance what's going to come up that triggers people. So basically, and I think this applies to qualitative research across the board, if you're in an unstable place, self-care comes first, whether that means just building relationships or rebuilding relationships with people that can love and take care of you, or being in therapy or what have you. Self-care comes first. And then when you're in a better place, then you can reopen the question. Now, another question that comes up is, can terrapsychological work be a spiritual path? My students think so. I think so. A lot of us who practice it think so. It doesn't tend to take the form of a specific religious creed, ideology, institution, anything like that. And it doesn't take stands that would prevent, for instance, people of devout other religions from working together on the same projects. So we could have Muslim practitioners, Catholic practitioners, whoever, working on similar things. Spiritual is a fraught word. It's highly problematic to some. And so my own way of holding it, and everybody's different about this, would be that by spiritual, I mean some kind of deeply reverent and emotional involvement in something that I experience as both sacred and larger than me. And that doesn't necessarily mean a literal God to believe in. It can, and it does for some people. But being in touch with the wisdom of the more than human as it shows up all around us in the world, in the cosmos, for some of us, that passes as spiritual. So I think it can be a spiritual path in that sense. And if you're interested in a deeper discussion about this, if you go to my website, chalkwist.com, and I'll leave a link below, there are some articles on what I call terra gnosis, Terra gnosis, Gnosis, where we actually use terrapsychological work as a spiritual path. But in these videos, I'm emphasizing its use as research, as qualitative research. So lastly, I'm asked sometimes, what is my hope for both terrapsychology and terrapsychological inquiry? So here's a little more or less off the top of my head wish list, in no particular order of priorities. So continuing to grow our community of practitioners, which seems to be happening by itself and has for a number of years now. It's nice to watch that. New people always coming in and bringing interesting ideas and modes of creativity. It's great to watch. Also to continue to see that community diversify. That's a joy for all of us. And it immeasurably adds to the richness of the work. Also, I would like to see a large group or an entire community do a terrapsychological inquiry together. I think that would be great. To the best of my knowledge, no one's done that yet. I'd be happy to advise. That would be fantastic. On the academic side of the house, at some point, I think we need a terrapsychology journal. I certainly don't have time to create one and get one running, but I would support it if somebody did. I think we're going to need another anthology. So we have a book out. It was published in 2010 called Rebirths, and that's Rebearths, Conversations with a World Ensouled. And that was published at a time when terrapsychology was mostly about studying the presence of place and how places get into us. Really great chapters in there. And so we need an updated anthology at some point. And then down the road, we might even need our own publishing house. So that's up for consideration. Also on the academic side of the house, I teach a class in terrapsychology to graduate students at the California Institute of Integral Studies. I've taught terrapsychology other places as well, including Pacifica Graduate Institute, and I've even given a little bit of it to environmental science studies students at UCSB, smuggled a little bit into the science classes. It would be great to see a master's program in terrapsychology at some point. Now, in terms of terrapsychological inquiry research, I'd like to see more work with what I've been calling earth dreaming. So earth dreaming is the practice arm of terrapsychology, just as terrapsychological inquiry is the research arm. So earth dreaming refers to real down-to-earth practices that help us re-engage consciously with the natural world. It's easy to do. There isn't a lot of theory. I use it in workshops and in classes. So it would be great to do some kind of research on the earth dreaming practices. And I have another website called World Read, where read is spelled R-E-D-E. That's the old forerunner of our English word read, and it refers to interpreting, to interpret the world. So at World Read, there's actually a tab on earth dreaming, so I'll include a link to that below too. Terrapsychology in film, lots of possibilities there, a documentary or two, but other genres as well. It'd be interesting to see what creative filmmakers can do with these ideas. I think they lend themselves to image and drama and story, so I'm waiting for someone to come along and make that happen. And the arts in general, terrapsychological art, to some extent, this has already been developed and used in some of our studies. So more of that, more of the arts. And lastly, I'll mention with terrapsychological work, it's important to us who do it to stay at the margins, to stay at the creative edge, to not be absorbed by dominant intellectual paradigms of one sort or another, whether those are industrial or materialistic or what have you. Because change, and in this case I mean change in how we relate to the world and to each other, change tends not to happen by going into some sort of a mainstream system and trying to influence it. There's a little bit of change that happens that way, but nothing really transformative from the bottom to the top. What tends to happen in those cases is that the system absorbs the would-be change agent, and then they're gone. But what works, what makes lasting change, is when the people working at the margins stay there, and their good work in the world, and their passion for what they do, and their consistency, drag the culture a little bit in their direction, and the culture changes. So a hope I have for terrapsychological work going forward is that we will, no matter what happens, continue to listen in on the sound of the world from the margins of culture and consciousness as the sound of the world matches the pulsings of our own listening hearts.